My name is Ethan Caldwell, and the Black Hills of South Dakota had always been my sanctuary, a place where the whispering pines and jagged granite peaks felt more like home than any house I'd ever lived in. I'd been hiking these trails for over a decade, a seasoned outdoorsman at 32, with a lean frame hardened by years of scaling cliffs and trudging through snow-dusted valleys. My friends called me reckless, but I wasn't careless. I knew every contour of these hills, every hidden spring and forgotten mining trail. I navigated blizzards, dodged rattlesnakes, and once spent 3 days stranded in a ravine with nothing but a knife and a half-empty water bottle. So when I set out that crisp October morning, my pack slung over my shoulder, I wasn't worried. The plan was simple, a solo trek through the less-traveled northern ridges, a 4-day loop I'd mapped out to clear my head after a rough year. My job as a freelance wilderness guide had dried up. My girlfriend had left me for someone with a steadier paycheck, and I needed the silence of the wild to reset. I left a note on my truck at the trailhead, detailing my route, and told my buddy Jake I'd be back by Tuesday. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth as I started up the trail, my boots crunching on frost-kissed gravel. The Black Hills were alive that day, the kind of alive that makes your blood hum. Red squirrels chattering, a distant elk bugling, the wind carving through the canyons like a living thing. The first day was perfect. I climbed steadily, my breath puffing in the chilly air, following a faint path that wound through stands of ponderosa pine and aspen groves glowing gold in the autumn light. The Black Hills aren't like the Rockies or the Sierras. They're older, quieter, with a weight to them, like they're holding secrets in their bones. I'd always felt it, that sense of something watching, but I chalked it up to the stories, Lakota legends, miners' tales of strange lights, whispers of things older than the hills themselves. I made camp that night in a small clearing, my tent pitched under a rocky overhang. The stars were sharp, like pinpricks in a black curtain, and I fell asleep to the sound of an owl hooting somewhere deep in the forest. Day 2 started easy enough, but by midday, the weather turned. A storm rolled in, fast and mean, the kind that catches even experienced hikers off guard. Dark clouds swallowed the sun, and the temperature plummeted. I pulled on my rain gear, checked my map, and decided to push on toward a narrow pass I'd used before. The trail was slick, the rocks treacherous underfoot, but I wasn't worried. Not yet. I'd handled worse. By late afternoon, though, the rain had turned to sleet, and visibility was near zero. I was maybe 10 miles from the nearest road, deep in a section of the hills where cell service was a fantasy. That's when I saw it, a shape in the mist, just for a second, tall and thin, moving between the trees. It wasn't an animal, not a bear or a deer. It was upright, deliberate, gone before I could focus. My heart kicked up, but I told myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks. The next few hours blurred into a fight against the elements. The sleep became a full-on ice storm, coating everything in a glassy sheen. I needed shelter. Fast. I remembered an old mining cave nearby, one I'd explored years ago, its entrance half hidden by a tangle of roots and boulders. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than freezing. I slogged through the storm, my headlamp cutting a weak beam through the swirling white. When I found the cave, it was smaller than I remembered, barely a slit in the rock face, but dry enough. I crawled inside, my breath steaming, and set up a makeshift camp. The wind howled outside, but the cave was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to that shape in the mist. I'd seen things in the wild before, optics, exhaustion, shadows, but this felt different. I pulled out my journal, a habit I'd kept since my first solo hike, and scribbled down what I'd seen. Tall, thin, moved fast. Not human? Trick of the light. I laughed at myself, but the laugh sounded hollow. That night, I dreamed of the hills, but they weren't the hills I knew. They were warped, the trees too tall, the shadows too deep, and something was following me. Its steps silent but heavy, like it was part of the earth itself. Morning brought no relief. The storm hadn't let up, and my gear was soaked despite the cave. My food was running low. 2 days' worth, maybe less. I had to move, storm or not. I packed up, my hands numb, and crawled out of the cave. That's when I noticed the tracks. They were faint, pressed into the mud just outside the entrance, too long and narrow to be mine, with no tread pattern, just smooth, almost claw-like impressions. My stomach twisted. I'd been alone out here, hadn't I? I scanned the trees, but the sleet was too thick to see far. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a mountain lion, though the tracks didn't match. I took a photo with my phone, the battery at 20%, and started moving. The plan was to head south, toward a ranger station about 15 miles away. But the storm had erased the trail, and my map was useless in the whiteout. I relied on my compass and instinct, but the hills felt wrong, like they'd shifted overnight. Landmarks I knew, split boulders, a lightning-scarred pine, were gone or in the wrong place. By midday, I was disoriented, my legs burning, my pack heavier with every step. That's when I heard it, a low hum, not wind, not animal, but something else, like the hills themselves were vibrating. It came from everywhere and nowhere, steady, then gone. I stopped, my heart pounding, and saw it again, that shape, closer this time, maybe 50 yards off, standing still between two pines. It was tall, too tall, its edges blurred like it was part of the storm. I shouted, my voice swallowed by the sleet, and it vanished. I don't know how long I stumbled through that storm. Hours, maybe days. Time got slippery, the way it does when you're cold and tired and scared. My phone died, my headlamp flickered out, and my food was gone. I was hypothermic, my thoughts foggy, but I kept moving because stopping meant dying. I found another cave, smaller, barely a crevice, and wedged myself inside. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my knife. That's when I saw the markings. They were scratched into the rock, not deep, but deliberate, symbols I didn't recognize, loops and angles like a language no one had spoken in centuries. They weren't there when I'd entered. I'd swear to it. I traced them with my finger, my breath hitching. They felt warm, which was impossible in that cold. The hum came back, louder, and I felt it in my chest, like it was pulling at me. I don't remember passing out, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to silence. The storm was gone. The cave was empty, the markings still there, glowing faintly in the dark. I crawled out, my body screaming, and saw something that made no sense. My pack, which I'd been carrying, was sitting 10 feet away, untouched, with a single object beside it, a smooth, black stone, perfectly round, like it had been carved by hand. It wasn't mine. I picked it up and it was warm like the symbols. I slipped it into my pocket, too exhausted to question it, and started walking. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I had to keep going. The hills were quiet now, too quiet, and I felt like I was being watched, not by eyes, but by the land itself. The black hills had turned on me, and I could feel it in my bones, a shift in the air that wasn't just the cold. I stumbled through the forest, the smooth black stone heavy in my pocket, its warmth unnatural against the chill seeping through my jacket. My compass was useless now, the needle spinning lazily, refusing to settle on north. I'd been hiking these hills for years, but this place felt alien, like I'd stepped into a version of the Black Hills that didn't belong on any map. The trees were too tall, their branches gnarled in ways I didn't recognize, and the ground seemed to shift underfoot, soft one moment, hard as granite the next. I was dehydrated, my lips cracked, my stomach a tight knot from days without food. The storm had passed, but the sky stayed gray, a low ceiling of clouds that swallowed the sun. I kept moving south, or what I thought was south, toward where I hoped the ranger station still stood. My legs were lead, my boots caked with mud, but stopping wasn't an option. The silence was worse than the storm, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves, sounds that made me whip around, expecting to see that shape again. It didn't show, but I felt it, a presence just beyond my sight, like a shadow you only catch in the corner of your eye. I don't know how long I walked before I found the stream. It was shallow, barely a trickle, cutting through a rocky gully I didn't recognize. The water was clear, too clear, like it had been polished. I knelt, desperate, and drank, the cold burning my throat. That's when I saw the reflection, not just mine, but something else, a flicker of movement behind me. I spun, my knife in hand, but there was nothing, just pines and mist. My heart hammered, and I checked the water again. The reflection was gone, but the stone in my pocket pulsed, warm, then cold, then warm again, like a heartbeat. I pulled it out, half expecting it to glow or hum, but it just sat there, black and smooth, heavier than it should have been for its size. I thought about tossing it, leaving it in the stream, but something stopped me, a feeling, not quite fear, but close, like I'd be giving up something I'd need later. I tucked it back in my pocket and kept moving, following the stream because it was the only landmark I had. The gully widened into a valley, and that's where I found the first real sign I wasn't alone. Carved into a boulder, half covered by moss, were more of those symbols from the cave, loops, angles, lines that seemed to twist when I looked too long. They weren't random. They felt like a message, but one I couldn't read. I took out my journal, its pages damp and curling, and sketched them as best I could, my hands shaking from cold or fear or both. The valley led me to a clearing, and that's where things got stranger. The ground was flat, unnaturally so, like it had been leveled by hand. In the center stood a circle of stones, each about knee-high, arranged with precision. They weren't like the stone in my pocket, but rough, weathered granite, the kind you'd find scattered across the hills. What caught my eye was the pattern. Each stone had a single symbol carved into it, matching the ones from the cave and the boulder. I counted 12 stones, 12 symbols, and the air around them felt heavy, like I was standing in a vacuum. I stepped into the circle, not sure why, just drawn to it. The hum came back, low at first, then louder, vibrating through my chest. The stone in my pocket burned, not hot enough to hurt, but enough to make me flinch. I dropped it, and it hit the ground with a thud too loud for its size. The hum stopped, and for a moment, the clearing was silent. Then I heard footsteps, not mine, not an animal's, but deliberate, human-like, circling the clearing just beyond the trees. I grabbed the stone and backed out of the circle, my knife out, shouting into the mist. "Who's there? Show yourself." Nothing answered, but the footsteps stopped, and I swear the trees leaned in, like they were listening. I didn't stay in that clearing. I ran, my pack bouncing, my breath ragged. The valley climbed into a ridge, and I followed it, hoping for a vantage point to get my bearings. The Black Hills are full of high points, but none of them looked familiar anymore. The ridge ended at a cliff, maybe 100 feet high, overlooking a sea of pines stretching into the fog. I sat, exhausted, and checked my journal. The sketches of the symbols were there, but they looked different, like the lines had shifted on the page. I flipped back to my earlier entry, the one about the shape in the mist, and found something I hadn't written, a single symbol, scrawled in black ink, identical to the ones on the stones. My pen was blue. I slammed the journal shut, my mind racing. Had I written it in a daze? Had someone or something touched my journal? The stone in my pocket pulsed again, and I pulled it out, staring at it. It wasn't just black anymore. Faint lines were etched into its surface, barely visible, like they were rising from inside it. I held it up, and the lines glowed faintly, matching the symbols I'd seen. I was losing it, I thought, or the hills were. I decided to head down the cliff, find a way back to civilization, but as I stood, I saw it again, the shape, down in the valley below, standing still, watching me. It was taller than before, its outline sharper, like it was letting me see it. I froze, and it raised an arm. Not in a wave, but like it was pointing, directing me somewhere deeper into the hills. I didn't want to follow, but I did. Something about the shape, the stone, the symbols, it pulled me like a current I couldn't fight. I descended the cliff, my hands scraping on the rock, and found a faint trail leading into a dense thicket of pines. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, and the hum was constant now, a low drone that made my teeth ache. I walked for hours, maybe days, losing track of time again. My body was failing, my vision blurring, but I kept going, driven by something I couldn't name. The trail ended at another cave, this one larger, its entrance framed by two massive boulders. The symbols were everywhere now, carved into the rocks, the trees, even the ground, glowing faintly in the dusk. I stepped inside, and the hum became a voice, not words, but a feeling, like it was speaking directly to my mind. It told me to keep the stone, to protect it, to follow it. I collapsed, my back against the cave wall, and clutched the stone. It was burning now, the symbols on its surface bright, shifting, alive. I don't know when I passed out, but when I woke, the cave was different. The walls were smooth, polished, like glass, and the symbols were gone. My journal was open beside me, pages filled with sketches I didn't remember making, maps, symbols, a drawing of the shape, its face blank but somehow watching. The stone was still in my hand, heavier, warmer, and I knew, somehow, it was the key to whatever was happening. I stepped out of the cave, and the black hills were gone. The landscape was wrong. Too vast, too silent, the sky a color I couldn't name. I was somewhere else, and the stone was my only way back. The world outside the cave wasn't the Black Hills anymore, and I wasn't sure it was Earth. The sky hung low, a sickly violet streaked with pulses of light that weren't lightning but something slower, deliberate, like veins glowing under skin. The ground was smooth, not dirt or rock but a glassy surface that reflected the sky's strange colors, stretching into a horizon that curved too sharply, too close. Trees, if you could call them that, jutted up in spirals, their branches sharp and metallic, glinting under the alien light. I stood there, the stone clutched in my hand, its warmth the only thing anchoring me to reality. My pack was gone, left behind in the cave, but my journal was tucked into my jacket, its pages heavy with sketches I didn't remember making. The air was thick, not with humidity, but with a pressure that made my ears pop, and that hum, the one that had followed me through the hills, was louder now, a chorus of vibrations that seemed to come from the ground itself. I was terrified, but there was something else, too, a pull, like the stone was guiding me, urging me to move. I took a step, and the ground rippled under my boot, not enough to trip me, but enough to make my stomach lurch. Wherever I was, it wasn't just different, it was alive. I walked, though I didn't know where I was going. The stone pulsed in my hand, its symbols glowing brighter, shifting into patterns that almost made sense, like a language I'd forgotten. I tried to focus, to think like the hiker I was, to navigate by landmarks or stars, but there were no stars, just that pulsing sky. The metallic trees didn't cast shadows, and the ground didn't hold tracks. I was nowhere, and yet I felt watched, not by the shape from the hills, but by something bigger, something woven into this place. My body ached, hunger, thirst, exhaustion, but those felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I checked my journal, hoping for answers, and found more pages filled with symbols, maps, and drawings of that tall, thin figure, its blank face staring from the paper. One page had a new sketch, a structure, like a tower or an arch, made of the same glassy material as the ground, with the stone drawn at its center. I didn't remember drawing it, but it felt like a destination, a place I was meant to find. The stone pulsed harder, and I swore it was heavier, dragging my arm down. I started walking toward a faint glow on the horizon, the only break in the endless violet. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time didn't work right here. The glow grew brighter, and I saw it. The structure from my journal, an arch twice my height, its surface etched with symbols that matched the stones. It stood alone in the glassy plain, no walls, no foundation, just an arch floating an inch above the ground. The hum was deafening now, shaking my ribs, and the stone was burning, its light spilling out in waves. I approached the arch, my heart pounding, and saw something inside it. Not a reflection, but a window. Through it, I glimpsed the Black Hills, my Black Hills, with their pines and granite peaks bathed in sunlight. It was home, but it felt like a memory, distant and untouchable. I reached out, and the stone leaped from my hand, hovering in the center of the arch. The symbols on its surface spun, aligning with the arch's carvings, and the hum became a voice again, Not words, but a command. Stay. I didn't want to stay. I wanted to go home, to feel dirt under my boots, to breathe air that didn't taste like metal. But the stone held me, its light wrapping around me, and I couldn't move. That's when I saw the clue, the strange thing that would haunt me later. A piece of my jacket, torn and frayed, caught in the arch's edge, fluttering like it was trapped between worlds. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that scrap of fabric. It was mine, no question. Green canvas, the same jacket I'd worn for years, patched at the elbows from too many falls. But I was wearing my jacket, whole and intact. I checked, running my hands over the sleeves, feeling the familiar stitches. The scrap in the arch was real, though, and it was moving like wind was pulling at it from the other side. I reached for it, but the stone flared, and the arch pulsed, pushing me back. The voice in my head was louder now, insistent. Stay. See. I didn't want to see. I wanted out. I lunged for the scrap, and my hand passed through the arch, into air that was warm and smelled of pine. For a second, I felt the black hills, the real ones, but then the stone yanked me back, its light searing my eyes. I fell to my knees, the ground rippling under me, and when I looked up, the arch was empty. No scrap, no glimpse of home. The stone was back in my hand, heavier than ever, and the symbols on it had changed again, now showing a map, not of the hills but of this place, with the arch at its center and lines radiating out like a web. I flipped open my journal, and there it was, the same map, drawn in that black ink I hadn't used. I was losing my grip, or maybe I'd already lost it, but I knew one thing. The scrap of my jacket was the clue, proof I'd been here, proof I'd touched something beyond the hills. I followed the map, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The stone wouldn't let me stop, its pulses guiding my steps like a leash. The landscape shifted as I walked, the glassy plain giving way to jagged spires, then to fields of crystalline grass that cut my boots. The hum never stopped, and neither did the sense of being watched. I saw shapes now, not the tall figure from the hills but others, faint and flickering, like ghosts made of light. They didn't approach, just watched, their outlines blurring into the sky. I was starving, my body screaming for food, but there was nothing here, no plants, no animals, just the endless violet and the hum. I drank from pools of liquid that looked like water, but tasted like nothing, leaving my throat dry. The map led me to another structure, a platform this time, raised on pillars of the same glassy material. Symbols covered it, glowing, shifting, and in the center was a slot, perfectly shaped for the stone. I hesitated, but the voice in my head was relentless. Place it. I set the stone in the slot, and the platform came alive, light pouring upward, forming a dome over me. Inside the dome, I saw images, flashes of the Black Hills, my truck at the trailhead, Jake's face, worried, searching. Then older images, miners with lanterns, Dakota warriors on horseback, and things older still, shapes like the one I'd seen, moving through forests that didn't exist anymore. The dome was showing me time, I realized, or something like it, and the stone was the key. I reached for it, but the dome collapsed, and I was alone again, the stone back in my hand, its symbols now showing a new path, deeper into this nowhere place. The stone was heavier now, not just in weight but in presence, like it was pulling at my mind as much as my hand. I followed its map, the glowing symbols shifting with every step, leading me deeper into this warped version of reality, where the Black Hills were just a memory. The landscape kept changing. Crystalline grass gave way to fields of black sand that swirled in patterns without wind, then to cliffs of mirrored stone that reflected not me but fragments of places I'd been. The trailhead where I'd parked my truck, the cave with the glowing symbols, the clearing with the stone circle. The sky pulsed faster, its violet light flickering like a dying bulb, and the hum was a constant pressure, vibrating in my skull. I was beyond hunger, beyond exhaustion. My body moved because the stone demanded it, each pulse a command to keep going. My journal was my only tether to sanity, though its pages were a mess of sketches and symbols I didn't remember drawing. The map in the stone pointed to a new destination, a spire rising from the black sand, taller than anything in the Black Hills, its surface etched with the same symbols that haunted me. I knew, somehow, that the scrap of my jacket, the clue I'd seen in the arch, was tied to this place, to the stone, to whatever had pulled me here. I just didn't know why. The spire loomed closer, its base surrounded by a ring of smaller structures, like altars, each glowing faintly with symbols that matched the stones. The air here was thicker, almost liquid, and every breath felt like swallowing glass. I saw shapes again, those flickering ghosts, more distinct now, tall, thin, like the figure from the hills, but their faces were blank, featureless, yet somehow watching. They didn't move toward me, just stood at the edges of my vision, their outlines pulsing with the sky. I gripped the stone, its warmth the only thing keeping me grounded, and climbed the spire's base. The surface was smooth, warm, like the stone itself, and the symbols seemed to crawl under my touch, rearranging themselves. At the top was a platform, and in its center, another slot, just like the one on the dome. The stone burned in my hand, urging me to place it, but I hesitated. The scrap of my jacket flashed in my mind, proof I'd been here, proof I was still me, even in this place. I checked my journal, and there it was, a new drawing, not of the spire but of the arch, with the scrap caught in its edge, and next to it, words I hadn't written. You are the bridge. The ink was black, not my blue pen, and my hands shook as I read it. The stone pulsed, insistent, and I knew I had to act, but fear held me back. What was I bridging? And to what? I placed the stone in the slot, and the spire came alive. Light exploded upward, not just from the platform but from the altars below, forming a web of glowing lines that stretched across the black sand. The hum became a scream, not sound but feeling, tearing through me like I was part of it. The sky split, revealing glimpses of the Black Hills, my truck, the trailhead, Jake's face, older now, haggard, searching through the pines. I saw others, too. Rangers, volunteers, dogs sniffing my old campsites. Time was wrong here, I realized. Months had passed back home, maybe more. The web of light tightened, and I saw the scrap again. Not in the arch, but in the real world, caught on a branch near a trail in the Black Hills. It was weathered, faded, but unmistakably mine, and people were gathered around it, pointing, talking. It was the clue, the strange clue that had sparked hope, proof I'd been there, proof I wasn't just gone. But here, in this place, it meant something else. The stone glowed brighter, and the shapes closed in, not threatening but expectant, like they were waiting for me to understand. The platform shook, and I saw myself, not a reflection, but me, standing in the Black Hills, holding the stone, my jacket torn. It wasn't a memory, it was happening, or had happened, or would happen. Time was breaking, and I was caught in it. I yanked the stone from the slot, and the light collapsed, the scream fading to a low hum. The shapes vanished, but the air was heavier, like the world was holding its breath. I stumbled down the spire, my legs barely working, and collapsed in the black sand. The stone was cool now, its symbols dim, but the map had changed, pointing to a new place, a chasm in the distance where the ground dropped away into darkness. My journal was open beside me, more pages filled with sketches. The spire, the web of light, the scrap of my jacket, and a new symbol, larger, more complex, like a key. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was important, tied to the clue, to the reason I was here. I thought about the Black Hills, about Jake, about the life I'd left behind. They'd found the scrap, I realized, but they didn't know what it meant, didn't know it was a message, not from me, but from this place. I wanted to go back, to tell them, but the stone wouldn't let me. It pulsed again, pulling me toward the chasm, and I stood, my body moving before my mind agreed. The shapes were back, watching, and I felt their presence like a weight, not hostile but not friendly, like they were part of the stone, part of the hills, part of whatever I'd stumbled into. The chasm was closer than it looked, its edges jagged, like the ground had been torn open. The hum was louder here, coming from below, and the air was cold, not like the Black Hills cold, but something deeper, like it was pulling the heat from my bones. I looked into the chasm, and it wasn't just dark, it was empty, a void that swallowed light. The stone glowed, its map showing a path down, into the dark, and I knew that's where the answers were, where the clue led. I thought about the scrap, about how it had appeared in the arch in the real world, a bridge between here and there. I checked my jacket again, still whole, but when I touched the sleeve, a piece tore away, the same green canvas, the same frayed edge. It fluttered to the ground, and the chasm pulsed, like it was breathing. I picked up the scrap, and the stone burned, its symbols aligning with the ones on the chasm's edge. The shapes were closer now, not just watching but circling, their blank faces turned toward me. The voice was back, not in my head but in the air, a single word. Choose. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I was running out of time. I clutched the scrap and the stone, and I stepped into the chasm, not falling but descending, like the void was carrying me. The Black Hills were gone, the shapes were gone, and all that was left was the stone, the scrap, and the dark. The chasm wasn't a fall but a descent, a slow sinking into a void that felt like it was swallowing me whole. The stone glowed in my hand, its light the only thing keeping the darkness at bay, a pulsing beacon that seemed to push back the weight of this place. The air was cold, sharp, like breathing knives, and the hum was everywhere, not just in my head but in the walls of the chasm, if walls even existed here. The scrap of my jacket was clutched in my other hand, its frayed edge rough against my fingers, a reminder of the Black Hills, of a world that felt like a dream. The stone symbols shifted, glowing brighter, forming a map that didn't point anywhere now, just a single symbol, the complex one I'd seen in my journal, the one that looked like a key. The voice was back, not a word this time, but a feeling, a pull towards something deeper in the void. I wasn't walking. I was floating, carried by a force I couldn't see, the stone guiding me like a compass in a world without direction. The shapes were gone, but I felt them, their presence woven into the dark, watching, waiting. I was terrified, but the terror was dull, buried under a strange certainty that the stone, the scrap, and I were part of something ancient, something the Black Hills had hidden for centuries. Time dissolved in the chasm. It could have been minutes or years. My body didn't know the difference. My hunger was gone, my thirst a distant memory, but my mind was sharp, too sharp, like the stone was keeping me alive, forcing me to see. The void began to change, not lighter but denser, the darkness taking shape. Walls, smooth and glassy, covered in symbols that glowed faintly, matching the stone. I landed, or the void set me down, on a platform suspended in the dark, its surface etched with the same key-like symbol. The stone burned, its light spilling out, and the platform responded, glowing lines racing across it, forming a circle around me. The scrap in my hand fluttered, though there was no wind, and I saw it again in my mind. The scrap caught on a branch in the Black Hills, found months later, a clue that sparked a search. I knew now it wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a message, a marker, proof I'd crossed a line no one was meant to cross. The platform shook, and the void opened above me, not to the violet sky, but to glimpses of the hills. My truck, rusted now, Jake's face, gray with grief, a search party combing the ridges. 6 months, I realized, maybe more, and the scrap was all they had. I clutched it tighter, and the stone pulsed, its symbol spinning, showing a new image. A door, not an arch, but a solid slab of stone, covered in symbols, standing alone in the void. I stepped toward the door. Though I didn't walk, my body moved, drawn by the stone. It was massive, taller than the spire, its surface pulsing with light. The symbols on the stone in my hand aligned with the doors, and the hum became a roar, shaking my bones. The scrap felt heavy, like it was part of the stone, part of me. I pressed it against the door, and the symbols flared, the scrap dissolving into light, merging with the stone. The door didn't open. It dissolved, and I was pulled through, not into the Black Hills, but into a place of light, blinding and warm, like the sun had exploded. I saw the hills, but they were wrong. Too green, too alive, like they were young, untouched by time. I saw people, not modern, not Lakota, but older, their faces painted with symbols like the ones on the stone. They carried stones like mine, and they moved through the hills, not hiking but ritualistic, placing the stones in circles, in caves, on peaks. The voice was clear now, not a feeling but words, ancient and sharp. You carry the key. You bridge the worlds. I understood, or thought I did. The stone was a tool, a relic, something that connected this place to the Black Hills, to time itself. The scrap was my mark, a piece of me left behind, a signal to the world I'd vanished from. The light faded, and I was back in the void, standing on the platform, the stone in my hand, the scrap gone. The door was gone too, but the symbols on the platform were glowing, forming a map again, this time pointing upward, toward a faint light in the distance. My body was breaking, my breath shallow, but the stone wouldn't let me stop. I moved, floating again, toward the light, and saw shapes. Not the ghosts but people, or echoes of them, their faces blank but familiar, like shadows of everyone I'd ever known. Jake was there, or his echo, staring at me with empty eyes, holding a piece of green canvas. The scrap, I realized, was more than a clue. It was a tether, a piece of me that had made it back to the Black Hills, found 6 months later, sparking hope I was alive. But I wasn't sure I was. The stone pulled me past the shapes, toward the light, and I saw another arch, like the one before, but larger, its edges sharp with symbols. Through it, I glimpsed the hills again, real this time, the sun bright, the pines swaying. I reached for it, but the stone held me back, its voice a command. Not yet. I fought it, screaming, my voice lost in the void, but the stone was stronger, its light wrapping around me, pulling me upward. The light became a tunnel, and I was rising, the stone burning in my hand, its symbols blazing. The tunnel walls were covered in carvings, not just symbols but stories, battles, rituals, shapes like the ones I'd seen, moving through forests and caves. I saw the Black Hills, not as they are but as they were, alive with people who knew the stones, who used them to cross into this place, to guard it or to hide it. I saw myself, or someone like me, holding a stone, standing in a circle of light, vanishing. The tunnel ended, and I was standing on a cliff, not in the void but in the Black Hills, or something close. The air smelled of pine, but the sky was wrong, too bright, too clear. The stone was cool now, its symbols dim, and my journal was gone, lost somewhere in the void. I looked down, and the scrap was in my hand again, fresh, not weathered, like it had just torn free. I knew it wasn't the same scrap. They'd found the other one, the clue, months ago, but it was mine, a piece of me that belonged here or there. The arch was behind me, glowing faintly, and I knew I could step through, but the stone pulsed, soft but firm. Choose. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I wasn't done. The Black Hills were calling, but so was the void, and the stone was the key to both. I stepped forward, toward the edge of the cliff, the scrap in one hand, the stone in the other, and the world began to be. The cliff's edge was sharp under my boots, the Black Hills sprawling below me, familiar yet wrong, like a photograph slightly out of focus. The air smelled of pine and earth, but it carried a metallic tang, a remnant of the void that clung to me like damp cloth. The stone in my hand was quiet now, its symbols faint, almost invisible, as if it had spent its energy pulling me back, or forward, to this place. The scrap of my jacket fluttered in my other hand, green and frayed, a twin to the one they'd found 6 months ago, the clue that had sparked a search, a whisper of hope that I was still alive. I knew now it was more than fabric. It was a bridge, a thread connecting me to the world I'd left, to the Black Hills that had swallowed me whole. The arch behind me glowed softly, its symbols pulsing in time with my heartbeat, offering a way back to the void or forward to the hills. The voice was silent, but its last word, choose, hung in my mind, heavy as the stone itself. I wasn't sure what I was choosing between, Life, death, or something older, something the Black Hills had guarded since before the first miners, before the Dakota, before time had a name. I stepped closer to the edge, the scrap and the stone anchoring me, and looked out, knowing this was where it ended, or began. The Black Hills below were alive, not just with trees and wind but with a pulse, like the hum that had followed me through the void. I saw flashes of the past, or maybe the future. Dakota elders placing stones in circles, miners carving symbols into cave walls, shapes like the ones I'd seen moving through the trees, their blank faces watching. The stone in my hand warmed, and I understood. It wasn't just a key, it was a record, a piece of something ancient that had chosen me, or that I'd stumbled into. The scrap was my mark, a piece of me left behind to signal I'd crossed over, a clue for those who'd never understand. I thought of Jake, of the search parties, of the rangers combing the hills, finding that weathered scrap on a branch near a trail I'd never walked. They'd called it a breakthrough, proof I hadn't just vanished, but they didn't know it was a message from a place beyond their maps. I wanted to go back, to tell them, to walk out of the hills and into the life I'd left, but the stone was heavy, and the arch was waiting. I looked at the scrap, then at the hills, and made my choice. I tucked the stone into my pocket, held the scrap tight, and stepped toward the arch, not knowing if it would take me home or deeper into the unknown. The arch's light enveloped me, warm and sharp, like stepping into a fire that didn't burn. I saw the Black Hills again. Not the warped version, but the real ones. The pines swaying, the sun setting over granite peaks. I saw my truck, rusted and abandoned, Jake's face, older now, etched with loss. The scrap was there, caught on a branch, but I was holding its twin, and I knew they were the same, somehow split across worlds. The stone pulsed, and the arch showed me more, not just the hills but the void, the spire, the chasm, the platform, all connected, a web of time and place with the Black Hills at its heart. The symbols on the stone glowed, showing a final map, not of a place but of a moment. Me, standing in the hills, whole and alive, the scrap in my hand, the stone in my pocket. I stepped through the arch, and the world shifted, the light collapsing into darkness, then opening again. I was standing in a clearing, the one from my first night, the rocky overhang above me, the stars sharp overhead. My pack was at my feet, untouched, but my journal was gone, and the stone was cold, its symbols blank. The scrap was still in my hand, fresh, not weathered, like it had never left me. I stumbled out of the clearing, my legs weak, my mind reeling. The Black Hills were quiet, the hum gone, the shapes gone, but I felt them, lingering in the shadows. I followed a trail I knew, or thought I knew, toward the trailhead where I'd left my truck. It was there, rusted, covered in dust, like it had sat for months. I checked my watch, but it was dead, the hands frozen at the moment I'd entered the cave. I walked, hours or days, until I reached a road, a ranger station in the distance. My clothes were torn, my jacket missing a piece. The scrap, I realized, was the one they'd found, the clue that had kept the search alive. I staggered into the station, and the ranger's face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. "Ethan Caldwell," he said, his voice shaking. I nodded, unable to speak, the stone heavy in my pocket. They told me I'd been gone 6 months, presumed dead, the scrap of my jacket the only trace. They'd found it near a trail I'd never walked, pinned to a tree by a smooth black stone, identical to mine but cold, lifeless. I didn't tell them about the void, the arch, the shapes. I didn't tell them about the stone in my pocket, still warm, its symbols faint but there. They wouldn't believe me, and I wasn't sure I believed it myself. They took me to a hospital, then home, but home wasn't home anymore. Jake came, his eyes red, his voice breaking as he hugged me, asking where I'd been. I told him I got lost, caught in a storm, survived in a cave. It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. The stone stayed in my pocket, hidden, and the scrap I carried was tucked into a box under my bed. The news called it a miracle, the hiker who came back, but I saw the questions in their eyes, the doubt. The Black Hills were quiet now, but I felt them watching, waiting. I tried to go back to guiding, to hiking, but the trails felt different, like they were holding their breath. One night, months later, I pulled out the stone, and it glowed, just for a second, showing a symbol I hadn't seen before, a circle, split by a line, like a door. I dreamed of the void that night, of the shapes, of the arch, and woke with the stone warm in my hand. I knew I'd go back, not because I wanted to, but because the Black Hills weren't done with me. The scrap, the clue, had brought me home, but the stone was a promise, or a warning, that I was still the bridge, still the key. I never told anyone about the stone, not Jake, not the rangers, not the reporters who hounded me for months. I hiked again, but never alone, never deep into the northern ridges. The Black Hills were my home, but they were something else now, a place where time bent, where stones carried secrets older than the earth. The scrap was proof, not just of my survival, but of something bigger, something I'd touched and couldn't untouch. I kept it, the stone too, locked away, but never far from my mind. Sometimes, at night, I'd hear the hum, faint, like a memory, and I'd check the stone, its symbols glowing softly, waiting. I didn't know what for, but I knew I'd find out someday, when the hills called again. For now, I lived, I walked, I carried the weight of the void, and the Black Hills kept their silence, their secrets buried in the pines, in the caves, in the stones that chose their keepers. The cliff's edge was sharp under my boots, the Black Hills sprawling below me, familiar yet wrong, like a photograph slightly out of focus. The air smelled of pine and earth, but it carried a metallic tang, a remnant of the void that clung to me like damp cloth. The stone in my hand was quiet now, its symbols faint, almost invisible, as if it had spent its energy pulling me back, or forward, to this place. The scrap of my jacket fluttered in my other hand, green and frayed, a twin to the one they'd found 6 months ago, the clue that had sparked a search, a whisper of hope that I was still alive. I knew now it was more than fabric. It was a bridge, a thread connecting me to the world I'd left, to the Black Hills that had swallowed me whole. The arch behind me glowed softly, its symbols pulsing in time with my heartbeat, offering a way back to the void or forward to the hills. The voice was silent, but its last word, choose, hung in my mind, heavy as the stone itself. I wasn't sure what I was choosing between, life, death, or something older, something the Black Hills had guarded since before the first miners, before the Dakota, before time had a name. I stepped closer to the edge, the scrap and the stone anchoring me, and looked out, knowing this was where it ended, or began. The Black Hills below were alive, not just with trees and wind, but with a pulse, like the hum that had followed me through the void. I saw flashes of the past, or maybe the future. Dakota elders placing stones in circles, miners carving symbols into cave walls, shapes like the ones I'd seen moving through the trees, their blank faces watching. The stone in my hand warmed, and I understood. It wasn't just a key, it was a record, a piece of something ancient that had chosen me, or that I'd stumbled into. The scrap was my mark, a piece of me left behind to signal I'd crossed over, a clue for those who'd never understand. I thought of Jake, of the search parties, of the rangers combing the hills, finding that weathered scrap on a branch near a trail I'd never walked. They'd called it a breakthrough, proof I hadn't just vanished, but they didn't know it was a message from a place beyond their maps. I wanted to go back, to tell them, to walk out of the hills and into the life I'd left, but the stone was heavy, and the arch was waiting. I looked at the scrap, then at the hills, and made my choice. I tucked the stone into my pocket, held the scrap tight, and stepped toward the arch, not knowing if it would take me home or deeper into the unknown. The arch's light enveloped me, warm and sharp, like stepping into a fire that didn't burn. I saw the Black Hills again, not the warped version but the real ones, the pines swaying, the sun setting over granite peaks. I saw my truck, rusted and abandoned, Jake's face, older now, etched with loss. The scrap was there, caught on a branch, but I was holding its twin, and I knew they were the same, somehow split across worlds. The stone pulsed, and the arch showed me more, not just the hills but the void, the spire, the chasm, the platform, all connected, a web of time and place with the Black Hills at its heart. The symbols on the stone glowed, showing a final map, not of a place but of a moment. Me, standing in the hills, whole and alive, the scrap in my hand, the stone in my pocket. I stepped through the arch, and the world shifted, the light collapsing into darkness, then opening again. I was standing in a clearing, the one from my first night, the rocky overhang above me, the stars sharp overhead. My pack was at my feet, untouched, but my journal was gone, and the stone was cold, its symbols blank. The scrap was still in my hand, fresh, not weathered, like it had never left me. I stumbled out of the clearing, my legs weak, my mind reeling. The Black Hills were quiet, the hum gone, the shapes gone, but I felt them, lingering in the shadows. I followed a trail I knew, or thought I knew, toward the trailhead where I'd left my truck. It was there, rusted, covered in dust, like it had sat for months. I checked my watch, but it was dead, the hands frozen at the moment I'd entered the cave. I walked, hours or days, until I reached a road, a ranger station in the distance. My clothes were torn, my jacket missing a piece. The scrap, I realized, was the one they'd found, the clue that had kept the search alive. I staggered into the station, and the ranger's face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. "Ethan Caldwell," he said, his voice shaking. I nodded, unable to speak, the stone heavy in my pocket. They told me I'd been gone 6 months, presumed dead, the scrap of my jacket the only trace. They'd found it near a trail I'd never walked, pinned to a tree by a smooth black stone, identical to mine but cold, lifeless. I didn't tell them about the void, the arch, the shapes. I didn't tell them about the stone in my pocket, still warm, its symbols faint but there. They wouldn't believe me, and I wasn't sure I believed it myself. They took me to a hospital, then home, but home wasn't home anymore. Jake came, his eyes red, his voice breaking as he hugged me, asking where I'd been. I told him I got lost, caught in a storm, survived in a cave. It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. The stone stayed in my pocket, hidden, and the scrap I carried was tucked into a box under my bed. The news called it a miracle, the hiker who came back, but I saw the questions in their eyes, the doubt. The Black Hills were quiet now, but I felt them watching, waiting. I tried to go back to guiding, to hiking, but the trails felt different, like they were holding their breath. One night, months later, I pulled out the stone, and it glowed, just for a second, showing a symbol I hadn't seen before, a circle, split by a line, like a door. I dreamed of the void that night, of the shapes, of the arch, and woke with the stone warm in my hand. I knew I'd go back, not because I wanted to, but because the Black Hills weren't done with me. The scrap, the clue, had brought me home, but the stone was a promise or a warning that I was still the bridge, still the key. I never told anyone about the stone, not Jake, not the rangers, not the reporters who hounded me for months. I hiked again, but never alone, never deep into the northern ridges. The Black Hills were my home, but they were something else now, a place where time bent, where stones carried secrets older than the earth. The scrap was proof, not just of my survival but of something bigger, something I'd touched and couldn't untouch. I kept it, the stone too, locked away, but never far from my mind. Sometimes, at night, I'd hear the hum, faint, like a memory, and I'd check the stone, its symbols glowing softly, waiting. I didn't know what for, but I knew I'd find out someday when the hills called again. For now, I lived, I walked, I carried the weight of the void, and the Black Hills kept their silence, their secrets buried in the pines, in the caves, in the stones that chose their keepers.